Hello, this is Dr. Dawn Michael. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about what do you do if you are living in an unhappy marriage? And this affects probably at least 40% of the people that are currently married. And hopefully, after I go through these 10 things, you will figure out either to work on your marriage and ways to do it, which I will explain, or sometimes the marriage doesn't work out and you have to make that hard decision of leaving. I have personally been through a divorce myself. It was a while back, and it was one of the hardest decisions that I ever had to make. And it's not something that I take lightly, and I went through many of the steps that I'm going to go over with you. And in my case, I was not able to save the marriage and I had to leave. And so, for all of you out there, I would love to save you the pain of going through what I had to go through, and hopefully you can find a way to save your marriage. But I will say that sometimes you're not able to save a marriage, and the healthiest thing for you is to actually leave. In my situation, I went through many years of a contentious divorce, so I would tell anybody to avoid the legal system at all cost. But I was able to eventually find love again and happiness again, and it's been many years now. So that doesn't mean that if you do go through a divorce that you can't find love again and have a lasting relationship. So I'm going to go over 10 items here and get into detail on each one of them. So again, the topic is what to do if you are in an unhappy marriage. And I will say one thing, a happy marriage can be the most fulfilling and wonderful thing. It can make you feel like you have a true partnership, a friend, somebody that has your back, somebody that makes you feel good about yourself and lifts you up, not somebody who puts you down or makes you feel bad or creates illness in you. And that can happen when you're in an unhappy marriage. The stress can actually affect your health. And that's really the point where you have to decide, am I going to be getting into a depression? Am I going to be living an unhealthy lifestyle? Am I going to be shutting off to everybody around me because I am in an unhealthy marriage? And at that point, you really need to make the decision for yourself. And it does get more difficult if children are involved. So it's not something that a person should take lightly. And when I do work with couples, I really try to get them to go through all of these steps before they make the decision to leave the marriage, or if they make the decision to leave the marriage. So number one, and this is really the most important, is you need to figure out what the root problem is in your relationship. There are definite root problems in relationships, and sometimes people don't know what those problems are, but it's extremely important to find out, to pick out the real root problems that are causing you unhappiness in the marriage, that you feel you're not able to fix, and just write those root problems down, okay? Because we're going to go through some ways to deal with that. Number two, what part do you play in the root problem? So this is really being mature and really taking a look at how you are contributing to the root problem. Is there anything that you can do to change or make that root problem better? So sometimes if you change the way that you react to your spouse, or you change the way that you are dealing with a problem with your spouse, oftentimes they will react to that. And it could be a positive reaction or a negative reaction. But the point is, you have to change to find out how their reaction is going to be. And so I've had in many situations with couples where they have made some slight changes, and it takes about 3 months for the other person to realize that you have seriously made those changes, and then they make the adjustments. And they can be positive adjustments, or sometimes you find out that they they can't adjust to you perhaps becoming more independent. Or I've seen this in situations where there's substance abuse problems, where one person may have been an alcoholic and then they stopped drinking and they got help and they started changing their way, and their partner was not able to work with them, or they felt that they changed too much, or they found that they were very codependent in the marriage and that was their role, and they no longer felt that role, and it didn't work for them. So there's all kinds of things that can happen, but the most important part is that you have recognized that you have an issue, that you're part of this root problem, and you take the steps to change it, and then see how that works out in your relationship. Number 3, once you figure out what the root problem is, have you discussed that problem with your spouse and been completely open and honest with them? And I find that sometimes people are afraid to be open and honest with their spouse. And you really can't fix a problem if you're not going to be honest with them what the problem is. I've worked with people that have some sexual issues that hide it from their spouse, things that they continue to do, and their spouse reacts to them maybe in a way that isn't favorable, or their spouse takes it out on themselves because they think there's something wrong with them, when in fact it's the other person's sexual issue, and maybe they're not being completely honest, or they haven't worked it out themselves to resolve it. So there's other things besides that. Sometimes there's spouses that are using money in ways that are not productive or taking away from the family. They're having drug abuse problems. They're having an affair. I mean, there's so many things that can take place, but you really need to come forward and be honest with your spouse if you want to fix it. Number 4. This is a big one too, which I was just saying. Even if being open and honest may hurt the other person, it may also save the marriage. It may also end the marriage too. But at least you put your foot forward, you were honest, and you allowed the other person to make a decision as to how they felt. And that's one thing that is very important. If you're hiding something from your spouse and it doesn't allow your spouse to make a decision how they feel about what you're hiding, if they want to stay in the marriage, I've even had it where somebody was hiding some sexual issues or past abuse issues, or how they felt about themselves sexually, and they open up to their spouse, and their spouse actually felt better because they had been blaming themselves for the problem, or they had thought that they were going crazy because they knew that something was wrong, and they kept asking and they couldn't pinpoint it. And this also happens with people that are having an affair or cheated. The other spouse knows that something's wrong, but they are being lied to, and that deception over a long period of time is really what is going to hurt the most. And the longer it goes on, it can definitely end the relationship or make it so that the spouse never trusts you again. And so if you love your spouse, if you really love them, then keeping that from them is really not loving them. It's being very selfish. So it's important to be honest about those things. All right, number 5. Let's say you're not completely sure about what the root problem is. Let's say perhaps you're somewhat confused about it. This is when it's important to seek out counseling and figure out what that problem is and really understand it so that then you could go back and talk to your spouse about it and the two of you can work on it. If you're not completely sure about what the root problem is, it's very difficult to work on something that you yourself are confused about. Number 6, once you know what the root problem is and your spouse is on board with it, then it's time for the two of you to come up with a plan of action. How do you work through this root problem? And one of the interesting things is if couples work together, sometimes they can come up with a compromise, and that compromise will work. It's that they both understand that they want to resolve it, but sometimes not every root problem can be completely resolved. Sometimes you have to come up with a working compromise. And couples have done that and they have been successful with it. It does take work, it does take maturity, and it does take some good communication, but really working together and coming up with a plan can really save the marriage, and it can also bring couples closer together and make the marriage even stronger. Number 7, if you and your spouse have exhausted every option to fix the problem, sometimes problems are not fixable. And that happens where you have tried everything you can, you've gone to counseling, you've spoken about it ad nauseum, and you just realize that you're not able to fix the problem. Some problems are not fixable in a marriage. And so once you've exhausted that, then you have to come up with number 8. Time to exit the marriage. And one of the most important things is for the couple to go to counseling or a mediator or somebody to help them exit the marriage where it's not contentious, where they're exiting it as friends, hopefully, especially if children are involved, and that they continue to have open communication to one another and that both people are fair. And the 9th one, if a child is involved or children are involved, for the parents to parent together and to remember to put the children first and to really work through some of the parenting issues and with a mediator, and of course to avoid court at all cost because it usually makes situations worse, especially when children are involved. Because I will tell you, once you get into the court system with children, you no longer have the control over being a parent. Sometimes the courts take control over that and it could make it an even worse situation. And number 10, there are many people that may leave their spouse, yet they still love each other. They're still friends, but there are some circumstances where the couple no longer can stay in the marriage. They've grown apart. They've found things out about each other that just don't work for them. Yet you can still maintain a friendship, a relationship, and especially again if kids are involved, keep it amicable. And sometimes if you're in a long-term marriage, you even may have relatives from each side that you continue to want to spend time with. And so it's important to put the hurt aside and the anger aside and work through those issues on your own so that you're able to still be able to maintain some type of a working relationship, again, if children are involved. If children are not involved and you both want to go your ways, then that's fine too. And just know that people shouldn't stay together just because they feel like they are lonely and they're never going to find someone else. That's not a reason to stay with your spouse. And it's not a reason to stay in an unhappy marriage, even if you have children. Because if you are so unhappy or there is abuse involved, then the children in many ways are affected by it in a negative way. They see that parents are more involved with fighting with each other, or they are depressed, or they are avoiding coming home to the house. And so the children in many ways are affected by this, where in some circumstances it would be better if the parents were not together, but hopefully we're still able to be friendly with one another. So if you're in this situation or you're in an unhappy marriage, these are some things that you can do. And I do pray for most people that you work through it and you stay together and you can work through these problems, because many couples that have worked through their problems and stayed together have had a much more solid marriage that has lasted for a long time. But again, if you can't, it's also important that you exit the marriage in a positive way. And many people don't think about that when they're trying to exit a marriage, but it's just as important that you get counseling, mediation, and help when you exit a marriage. So once again, it doesn't turn into something that is negative and you're tied up in court for years and years. All right, I hope that this helped some of you. If you need to reach me, I am at thehappyspouse.com. If you have a question, I have a contact page, and I do charge a small fee for questions, but if you really do need to ask a question and you're not ready to book an appointment, that's one way to get some help. As you know, I believe everyone deserves to have a healthy sex life, and so do you. Have a great day.